Good day, good people. I'm Dr. Johnny Pierce, but you can just call me Johnny, and this is the Actually Well podcast. Today, we're going to talk about thinking, thoughts, perceptions, affirmations, beliefs, judgments, everything to do with thought. Is there a voice in your head talking to you throughout the course of the day, giving you directions about what you need to do, giving you ideas, reprimanding you, redirecting you, asking you to recall things? That little voice doesn't exist for some folks. Some people don't have that voice at all. It's called an inner monologue. And we're just starting to appreciate those folks' experience. If you happen to be one of those people, you are in a minority, but you do exist. For the majority of people, there is a voice there, though. And since that voice is there, it seems to act as like a traffic control cop, telling us what to do, what to focus on, guiding us about how to do things and the like. As a result, many of us lean on that voice to get us through the day. Keep in mind whatever we're supposed to be getting done that day as far as a checklist, call them a mental checklist. And all of this is done through thought. Typically, that inner voice is expanding upon something that you've already experienced or trying to get you ready for what you're going to experience next. It may be helpful at times, other times it may not be very helpful. But today I want to talk a little bit about that to begin this process of talking about thought. Now, does your voice that's in your head sound like you, or does it sound like someone else? That is actually dependent on the person. Some people hear their own voice kind of echoing. Some people hear other people's voices. I've literally had clients say they hear me, which I pray to God they don't. But I've heard it before. And what that voice is doing at any given moment, is it being kind? Is it being critical? It can be doing a lot of different things. But again, all of this is a thought process. And what wellness looks like, of course, starting there and not trying to finish there, is that hopefully this voice is something that you get a lot of love from, that this voice is rooting you on, is encouraging you, is doing things like that. And every now and then, maybe that voice reminds you that, hey, man, you really messed up right there. Or, come on, girl, you can do better than that, because that too can be loving. But something that we've noticed in the field is that for many, that inner voice is at times very negative. And the negative self-talk that a person might have can ruin their mood. It can bring down a good moment. It can generate anxiety in a social situation. It can be problematic. And what we've come up with to kind of counter that are affirmations. And you've likely heard the term positive affirmations. Well, what is a positive affirmation? Well, it's supposed to be a true statement that you make about yourself to yourself. So that inner voice would say something to you like, you can do this, or you got this. It might highlight some skill that you have. You notice is your area of strength. You notice is what you do well. It would act as a reminder that you have the skills necessary to navigate whatever situation is in front of you. Sometimes people aren't familiar with doing that. They may have never gotten that message from somebody outside of them. They may have never thought to give it to themselves. And therefore, therapy becomes a space where it gets introduced as a way to interact with oneself. And some people like to do their affirmations on paper, so they'll write them out. Some people like to do their affirmations in the mirror, where they stand and they look at themselves and they pump themselves up. Now, I've seen some TV depictions and maybe even some movie depictions of what affirmations look like, and it makes it pretty cheesy. You got somebody standing in a mirror, trying on different personas, talking themselves up, and it just seems forced. It seems unnatural. It seems a bit goofy. Some people can do it that way, and maybe you'll get a kick out of it. Maybe that's the way that you want to start your day, is getting in the mirror after you finish brushing your teeth and getting your face clean and talking yourself up, getting yourself ready for the day ahead. I do think that taking a stance like that or doing it in that way may lead to what you've heard of in terms of imposter syndrome, where somebody talks themselves up based on hopes. I hope I can do this. I hope I can do that. but it's not based on what they know about themselves. And as a result, it doesn't feel consistent or authentic. I'm not saying all affirmations have to work that way, but I know that in some cases, when we've seen it on TV and in movies, that's kind of how it's gone. No, instead, I'm encouraging you to think critically about yourself, funny enough, and be honest with yourself about what you know in terms of how you do things. If you're somebody who's really skilled in social situations, play that up. If you're somebody who's really good at organizing things or timely, play that up. When you affirm yourself based on something that you, in fact, already have had some success with to start. And as you build a skill, then you encourage yourself that you're getting better at the skill. So if you are just now starting to be someone who speaks up in public spaces, so maybe you're a public speaker or you're somebody who's working to become a public speaker, you may want to highlight aspects of the last experience you had that you felt went really well. You know, I started strong there. Everybody was behind me. I got them excited. I got them ready to hear what I had to say. Or you might even want to highlight something that you felt like maybe nobody else would have noticed. You know, usually in that situation, I do this, but this time I did this. And as a result, I feel better about myself. So affirmations, if they are going to be well, and if they're going to be effective, I would encourage you to build them on the premise of things that you either have the skill in or are seeing gains in. If you talk yourself up in a way that's just inconsistent with who you've known yourself to be or with results you've produced, then it's probably not going to land as well. You're probably not going to connect as well with it. For those of you who don't want to talk to yourself in the mirror or anywhere else, you'd rather just keep that conversation going in your head, don't be afraid to pull out a pen and pad. Write it down. Write down what you want to affirm about yourself. Write down skills that you feel like you're growing in. Write down how you've seen progress from one situation to the next. And then maybe even elicit feedback from others. What are you all noticing? I know earlier this year when I turned 40, I reached out to a number of people who are really close to me and asked them about what have they seen in my development? How can I be a better friend? Where can I grow? And, how have I been a help? I mentioned a moment ago that earlier this year I turned 40, and that actually gets people thinking sometimes, thinking about whether or not that's old, thinking about whether or not a person is where they want to be in life at that point in time. There's a bit of judgment that might get generated around hearing someone's age or thinking about what somebody is doing. And judgment can be well. Typically, if judgment is happening, there's some type of discernment, there's some type of evaluation going on. You're trying to figure out how to interact or engage with something. And that can be very, very healthy. That can be something that's very useful to you. It's a skill that you actually need to develop. The better you can get at bringing data points together and seeing how they make sense and then making decisions based on that, all of these things being thought processes, they are tied together. The thing is, sometimes people lead with judgment before they have a chance to get the data points, before they have a chance to understand what might be going on. They judge it. They deem it something. They may deem it bad. They may deem it unpleasant. They may judge it as a certain way that actually limits how much more they can engage with it. So what, from a wellness standpoint, we're shooting for when it comes to judgment is that we've done the best we could to delay judgment. Because once we've judged something, it tends to be difficult for us to let go of that judgment. If we see something as bad, it tends to take a lot of additional data before we're convinced that maybe that initial judgment was off. We've got this connection to our beliefs that tends to keep us grounded to a point where, in the face of direct evidence that goes contrary to what it is we believe, we may still try to hold true to it, feeling that we're being manipulated or that something's not quite being shown the way it's supposed to. Instead of leading with judgment, I've encouraged many of my clients, and I believe I've said it here on the podcast, that leading with curiosity is the better way to go. Curiosity is also a thought process. It's one in which you continue to try to get more data, try to acquire more knowledge about a matter. You are inquisitive. You are kind of attuned. You attempt to try to understand, but you don't necessarily marry whatever initial ideas you have about how something is or why something is. When we're curious, we actually are quite open-minded. I think that term is very fitting because if you think about judgment, we are finalizing a thought. It is this. We are determining what it's going to be, and then we're going to work off of that. So if I deem it to be a way, then from that point forward, whenever I engage with that or come into contact with it, I don't really have to reevaluate it. I've already done that work. Well, if we do that work in a timely manner where we actually gave ourselves enough time to collect experiences, collect information, maybe even test some ideas. So an hypothesis or, being a researcher or some sort, all of these being thought processes as well. Then what we can do is we can delay that judgment by maintaining that curiosity. We live in a really social world these days, and a lot of us interact in social spaces, both online and in person. And if we let our initial impression of something dictate to us exactly how we interact with it or engage with it going forward, we may miss a lot because as much as we might think we can pick up in a quick amount of time, we're often wrong. It's not something that's wrong with us inherently. It's just that what meets the eye isn't always the full story. Things tend to happen for reasons, and reasons typically need to be inquired about. They aren't often just explicit. So if you are someone who tends to be quick to judge, recognize that about yourself. You don't have to chastise yourself for doing it. Just understand what consequences may follow. If you want to get better in terms of being able to delay that judgment, again, you need to judge at some point, just maybe don't want to lead with it. Then one of the things you can do is ask yourself some questions about what the rush is. Why am I trying so hard to find out exactly how I feel about this so quickly? And notice I brought the word feel into the discussion because in many ways our beliefs have feelings at their heart. We see them as thought processes. We see our beliefs as being based on logic. Logic is a very proper and very, very popular term when it comes to thinking. But fact of the matter is, logic doesn't exist without some type of emotional content to it. We just often undermine, downplay, or deny that there's any emotionality to it. We can rationalize things, another thought process, where we try more and more to validate or suggest that something must be so because we think it is so. And in some ways, we're only kind of digging our heels in further and further about how we truly feel about something. So, to help ourselves be more curious, one thing you might want to remind yourself of is that I don't know. I don't know why that person did that. I don't know why things are the way they are. I would have to ask questions about that, especially if it involves another person, because how would I know why they did that thing? I can imagine it, another thought process. I could guess at it, another thought process. But why not try to interact with that person, connect with that person, and maybe through connection, I'll gain a better understanding. Curiosity invites and encourages that connection. It invites and encourages those questions to be asked because now I'm having a conversation with you and I'm learning about you. I'm also learning about myself because I didn't stay with the initial judgment that I might have had. I got curious about that judgment. Why do I think it's that way? What leads me down this path? One of my favorite thought processes to talk about is actually planning. I've always been a future oriented person, and I don't know how that got started, but I remember being a kid and thinking to my 30s is the time in my life that I was most excited about because by that time I would have resources and be free to kind of move about how I wanted to. I wouldn't have a whole lot of people to answer to. And it kind of played out that way. I finished my doctorate by the time I was 28. So in my 30s, I was just working. I get off of work. If I wanted to socialize, I could do that. I had the resources that I could move about, got to travel some. And then, into my near my mid 30s, I became a parent. And as a result, I got to focus on parenting. I got to think ahead about what kind of parent I wanted to be. And all of that worked out pretty well. Thing is, though, during a conversation last year, somebody asked me about my goals. And I realized that most of the goals I had had from earlier in my life, I'd already been accomplished in terms of education, in terms of relationships, in terms of resources. A lot of the things were already satisfied. And I had to go back to the drawing board and start over. What do I want now? And how do I work towards getting there? Well, planning is the space in which we typically do that. And again, like all the other thought processes I've talked about so far, you might have that running conversation in your head, or you may have to break out a pen and pad to actually get some things down on paper and then see how it would play out. I've said it before, but the space between how things are and how you want them to be is all the motivation you will ever need. Well, I say that because in the space in between is distress. And now that I've done a recent continuing education event on stress, I've come to know that the best kind of stress for growth is eustress, EUSTRESS. So that kind of stress is ultimately what we really want to be in there, because if that is there, then it's going to promote growth. It's going to encourage us to take steps to get where we want to go. And I've been doing that. I've been doing that ever since I had that conversation. I sat down and I wrote out where I was and thought about how I gotten here and what were additional things I wanted to add on top of it, because there's nothing wrong with building on a strong foundation. And given that I'd had that success in the past with accomplishing goals through planning, it was an easy process for me to start. If you find that you're not someone who's historically been a planner, that thinking ahead is just not something you are quick to do, that's perfectly fine and okay. You have to think ahead a little bit, because you wouldn't be wherever you are without some type of thinking ahead. Whether it was something that was spurred by somebody outside of you, like a parent or an educator, or if it's something that maybe in a conversation with a friend came to mind. In any event, you have thought about things that are not immediately pressing. You have thought about things that are weeks away, months away, maybe years away. And tapping into that skill, which planning is another one of those skills that we have to develop over time, you might find that you can become a better planner. In this particular case, even if it's something small, like a trip that you got coming up, you probably take the time to figure out where you want to go. You don't just book a flight to anywhere, you book a flight to where you want to go. Then you think about what you might want to do while you're there. And you start looking into what resources might be in the area that will allow you to do that. All of this is planning. And if you hadn't thought about planning that way before, and you maybe thought about it as this grander thing where you had to have a 5-year plan or something like that, no, it can be just that simple. And it can be something that in a matter of a few minutes you do, as long as you concentrate on it. Now, sometimes plans get convoluted. We can try to take other people into account in a way that is beyond our actual ability. We can maybe make our plans be built around trying to make someone happy. Or we can try to make plans in which everybody gets to do everything they want to do, and we all just go along with it. Oh, that might be putting too much responsibility on ourselves. Maybe start with, hey, what am I trying to accomplish here? Whether it's something that's for the long term, the midterm, or the short term, what is it that I'm actually shooting for? What's the how I want things to be? And then maybe starting to look at, well, where am I at in that process? Because you may be further along than you realize. And if you're not, it may not take long for you to get to where you want to go. But planning is a full-on thought process. You can do it on paper, you can do it in your head. The question is, do you give yourself time to do it? More times than not, people are so busy that they don't have time to stop and think. Well, we can make that time. If you have a morning routine that sees you sitting and eating some type of breakfast, or for those who drink coffee, drinking your cup of coffee, that might not be a bad time to think ahead. What's going to happen today? What do I want to happen today? How am I going to make that happen? Because planning is not just about thinking about what you want, it's also thinking about how you're going to get there. And if you haven't been someone who made goals before, understand that every piece of research that's out there tells us if you write it down, it's more likely to happen. So that big plan that you got, or that great idea that you got, if you never put it on paper, if you never maybe type it up on a Word document, if you never put it somewhere outside of you that you can return to, you oftentimes let it fly off in the wind, because it may be hard to pull that out of your memory bank. Speaking of your memory bank, another thought process that I'm quite fond of is reflecting. Reflecting is somewhat an equal opposite of planning. Obviously, you may not have planned for everything that's already happened to have happened, but you have some memory of it. And you may be able to glean something from it if you do, in fact, sit and give yourself a chance to think back on it. What, in fact, can I take from this? And maybe you went to a event, and as you were there, you were being told about some new area of study, and it sounded kind of interesting, but you noticed that your attention kind of waned as the time went on. Why did I get bored? Why did I zone out? What was going on? Did I get distracted by something else? Did that inner voice start talking to you about something that maybe you didn't feel so great about? Don't know. But in any event, if by chance you were able to reflect on that experience and be curious about it instead of judging it, you might have realized, oh, wait, maybe my attention span's kind of short, because your attention span is part of your thought process. And if you do happen to be someone with a short attention span, maybe you have to be more mindful of it in a way where you get information in short doses. I think a lot of people like reels, or they like those quick little videos that give them information very quickly, and then it's off to the next one. I know TikTok's pretty popular. I'm not going to be getting on that, not for this podcast, not for my personal life, not ever. I'm good. But for those of you who are really into it, it's appealing because and at the same time, unfortunately, it's kind of training you to have a shorter and shorter attention span. That's something to be mindful of. That's something to be aware of. We can extend our attention span by slowly challenging ourselves to take in more information from sources that require us to sit with things. And if that is reading a bit more or watching podcasts, whatever it might be, it may take time for the information to get to us, but it may stick longer if we are able to get ourselves to believe that it's valuable. So if you are somebody who notices that when you go to reflect, you get distracted. When you go to reflect, you lose track of whatever it was that you were doing in the first place, it may be a skill that you've got to develop. And please consider it that way. Think about yourself as someone who's learning. Think about yourself as somebody who can grow. Because if all you can do is be critical of the thought process of how you do things, then you may find yourself with that negative self-talk or just leading with judgment. And before you know it, your world is a lot smaller than it could be, because it could be expansive. It could be grand. And being curious, being willing to reflect, being willing to plan, being willing to affirm yourself, all of these things can make it a little bit more fun to be in that head of yours. I want to bring this to a close by talking about perception. Perception is incredibly important. How we tend to look out into the world, what we tend to believe about the world, often shapes our experience of the world. While emotions and feelings can be distinguished in some ways, this is probably the place where they intermix the most. You may want to take a second to think about who you've known yourself to be. When given ambiguous or unclear situations, do you find yourself leaning any particular way? If you happen to be someone who leans positive, remember those charges we talked about in previous podcasts, you might be framed as an optimist, which of course is somebody who looks out into the world. They think that the best is going to happen. They tend to see the best in people. They tend to think the best outcome is going to play out in uncertain situations. Many of these folks have been highlighted as the way we all should be. Positive psychology has been a movement for a while now, and it strongly encourages people to be positive all the time. Always find the silver lining. Always, always, always. And always is an extreme. And like any other extreme, like never, you find yourself so far to a side that you can't see the other side clearly. I've encouraged us to move to the center, to be a bit more neutral. And by being neutral, it gives us a easy pivot to look to our left and to our right and see the negative sometimes and see the positive sometimes. The thing is, though, for an optimist, if I have the responsibility that I must always see the positive in things, I must always find the good, then I'm blending the concept of taking in information with judging it in rapid succession. I don't maybe give myself as much time to get as much data as I can. Every bit of data that I take in, I must spin in some way to make it positive. This has consequences for a person. Say they experience something that might be traumatic, or say they see something that's horrific. they have to work really hard to find the good in it. It can crush their belief in the world, and it can crush their belief in themselves. For those of us who happen to be people of faith, it can even crush their belief in God. And for some people, they refuse to believe in anything outside of themselves as a result of the fact that they know very horrible things are happening in the world, even as we speak. I would propose that if you take a neutral stance, it doesn't make it easier to have unfortunate things come our way. You find out that a close friend of yours got a cancer diagnosis and they're nowhere near the age range you would expect that. Somebody you know has a really poor outcome with something that they were working really hard on. Like, none of these things get inherently more fun to deal with just because we look at it in a more neutral way. But if we have to make these things positive, or if we have to try to stay positive when these things come up, that can add pressure to us that we maybe don't need. Now, if you happen to be somebody who leans a bit more negative, that you tend to be quicker to think that things are not going to play out well. You tend to be able to see the dark cloud but struggle to see the silver lining. If you are someone who regularly comes across as a cynic, or just not very confident the world can be anything other than horrible, you'll probably be termed a pessimist. Pessimist is somebody who's at another extreme. They tend to lean into the never side of the extremes, where nothing ever goes right. It's always bad, never plays out the way I want it to, and so on. Well, aside from those folks maybe not always being fun to be around, and I think another term for them is Debbie Downers or whatever, that has its own consequences as well. I mean, even on a beautiful day like today, I would show you what I'm looking at because I'm looking outside and it looks astonishingly beautiful. But even on a beautiful day like this, that person may have a hard time connecting with it. And again, with that process of taking in data and judging it all in one motion, they will find the part that is not pleasant about almost anything. And again, maybe difficult people to be connected to. They may find that their social circle is pretty small because only so many people are willing to listen to them on a regular basis, finding them to be a bit off-putting in some way or another, and that can be hard. But again, if we can maybe move more into the neutral space, because it may be hard to go from one extreme to the other, but if we can get maybe more into that neutral space, that person might find that while there are things about life, there are things about a job, there are things about an event, there are things about people that are off-putting, unpleasant, and in fact, potentially negative, there are also these amazing things that are going on at the exact same time. That life is kind of juggling those things. And we've talked about juggling before, between the good and the bad, the right and the wrong, and so on. But getting the neutral isn't necessarily the ultimate end game. Some people will call themselves realist. So they're not pessimists, they're not optimists, they're realists. Typically, these folks still have a lean, and you'll hear their lean in situations where stress is high. And the belief that a person is a realist can often be its own blinders. But with all three of these, we want to find a wellness perspective. We want to figure out, well, what does wellness look like here? If I realize that I'm someone who tends to lean negative, I just know that about myself, that I am more skilled at finding what's problematic or wrong in a given situation. I know that to be so about me. I have to decide, do I want to continue to be that way? Because believe it or not, I have a choice in the matter. We get to choose our perception. We get to choose what we feed. If I notice that I'm somebody who's critical, I can actually use that to my advantage if I'm going to be honest about myself. If I'm okay with the fact that I'm a bit more critical, I can just find places in which that's going to be encouraged, nourished, and appreciated. Maybe I don't bring that to every conversation I have with people because it might turn people off to talking to me. But there are some spaces where being critical is really, really important. And it can even be a career path for some. So knowing that about yourself and you deciding whether or not you want to embrace that or you want to change that, that's where wellness can show up for you. If you decide that it's something that you want to change, I would discourage you, funny enough, I'm being negative, from trying to do that to the extreme, trying to go from one end of the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum, because it may feel incredibly inauthentic. it may actually sicken you. You may be like, ugh, it could be that bad because it just doesn't seem to be consistent with who you've known yourself to be. Typically, it's got to be a gradual process. And I think neutral is a nice aim for either extreme. But if you are somebody who happens to be an optimist, you're the eternal optimist. No matter how bad the situation is, you will find that silver lining. Remember that you can stay that way. You can definitely choose to take in information and do that on a regular basis if you're willing to incur the consequences of it. Because some people may, after a while, grow tired of it. They may feel like it's an act. They may not feel like it's authentic. And as a result, you may get negative feedback about, man, you're always sunny and why you like a little bucket of sunshine or whatever. And that might seem like an odd thing for people to complain about, but if by chance something is really going on that is really problematic and maybe it's time to actually see the other end of the spectrum and you simply can't do it because maybe there's a block there, maybe there's a bit of a denial there, whatever it might be, you might have to look at that. Now, if you want to work on it, if something you decide that you ultimately want to change about yourself, notice I'm not encouraging you to become a pessimist. I'm encouraging you to think about how can I get to neutral? Because at neutral, I can still identify all those things that I see as positive, but I can also acknowledge and sit with all those things that I may see as negative because both of those things are likely there. It's not one or the other more times than not. We live in a both and world, not an either or more times than not. So what about the realist? The person who's sure that they are balanced, the right in the middle, I'm already there, I got it nailed down. Well, I would encourage you, if you wanted to do a little research. Do a little research on yourself. Maybe you are, in fact, a realist. Maybe you got it nailed down. You know how to be exactly neutral all the time. You see the plus and the minus in every situation, and you balance them out just right. Put yourself to the test. Do a little research. Think about the last 2 or 3 experiences you had that were, again, not clear. There are some things that are clearly felt or experienced as positive. If you get unexpected rewards, if you have someone surprise you and visit you, it could be news that you're expecting. It could be a commitment. It could be anything. Maybe you got the job, whatever it might be. Those things, for most people, they just register them as positive. But I'm saying those ambivalent situations, those not so clear, murky situations, where did you fall? Where did you lean? And that's the last few of them. What about the ones that come up next? How do you think you're going to lean? Maybe do a little prediction. Okay, I think that if this were to come up, then this is how we'll handle it. And then when you arrive at that experience, see if you actually handled it that way. You might find that, hey, maybe it's a little different than I expected. Now, I think you can be well as a pessimist. I think you can be well as a realist and as a optimist. I think you can be well in any way. But I do think that there are natural consequences that come along with any disposition. That's not a bad thing. That's not a good thing. That's just the nature of things. Almost everything has a consequence. We just call things consequences if we deem them bad. A reward is a consequence. It's something that follows something else. So as a consequence of doing this podcast, I've noticed that people have been watching the previous podcast. I like that consequence. I want you guys to keep watching the podcast. I want to continue to get comments. I want to continue to get likes. I want to continue to get subscribers, and I want you to continue to share it with people that may benefit from it. So yes, it's okay to be one of the 3, or if there's other variations out there, that's perfectly fine as well. I'm always going to promote neutrality. There I am being an extreme, saying always. But I'm promoting neutrality because I believe it gives you the most flexibility and the most ability to continue to evaluate things by delaying that judgment. If you find that to be difficult, then be curious about why it is that that's so difficult for you. What is it that you feel pushed or driven by? Why does it have to be a way before you've had a chance to get that information and that data? So we've talked about thoughts. Talked a little bit about affirmations, negative self-talk, planning, reflecting, judgment, curiosity. In the comments section, I'd like to hear what are thought processes that you may find to be enjoyable. Some people like to ponder. That's another one of those thought processes. Some people like to meditate, which is got a lot of thought going on there in some cases, and in other cases, no thought at all. There are different types of meditations out there. But I want to learn more about who's watching the videos and who's also thinking about what we're talking about in the podcast. So if you haven't already, click like, subscribe, share, please share. Share, share, share. This has been the Actually Well podcast, and I want you to be well.